Welcome to Solutions with Sagamore, a podcast produced by the Sagamore Institute that features solution-oriented conversations about key issues facing communities throughout Indiana, the United States, and the world. I'm your host, Tim Swearens. In this episode, Sagamore fellow Derek Redelman discusses the steep challenges facing men and boys in Indiana and across the U.S., with Carol D'Amico and Larry Smith. Derek, will you introduce Carol and Larry to our audience?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So this is the second podcast in a series focused on Workforce 2040 and talking about this big topic of boys and men. Welcome Larry Smith and Carol D'Amico. Carol, you come from a long history of education, workforce, Assistant Secretary of Adult and Vocational Education, Chancellor of Ivy Tech Indianapolis, Executive VP of Strada Education Network. Larry, you were at the IU School of Philanthropy, now President and CEO of Fathers and Family Center. All three of us at one point were at Hudson Institute. Larry, tell us a little bit about your organization.
So Fathers and Family Center is 32 years old this year. During that period, we've served about 25,000 fathers. We're best known for our Strong Fathers program. It's 3 weeks long, 90 hours of instruction. We focus on what we call the 4 Ps. We want to help these men to become a better person, a better parent, a better partner, better provider. Demographically, their average income is about $11,000 a year. And so we don't charge anything. In fact, we pay them a stipend to come.
You have your own podcast.
Indeed. We call it Daddy Issues. Sometimes,
Good title.
Sometimes the topics are very light. Sometimes they're pretty heavy. So we kind of mix and match there.
Great. Carol, you're heading up this project. Why are we focused on boys and men?
Well, I was doing a little research and thinking about it. This is not actually a new issue, even though it's getting a lot of attention these days. Really, we started talking about men really starting in the 1970s. And sadly, I've been around long enough to remember those days because the economy really started changing around in the 70s. And to be honest, so did our social programs, government programs started changing. And this issue of men getting out of the workforce, not getting back in, is getting a lot of attention these days. But it's really not exactly a new problem.
So this is the first big project that's part of the Workforce 2040 project here at Sagamore Institute. You were co-author of Workforce 2020.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I don't mean to brag. But when we did Workforce 2020, that was published in 1997, and my co-author, late Dick Judy, was a brilliant man. But I'll have to say, we saw this coming. I mean, we talked about it in the book, Workforce 2020. And the reason we thought that men would be struggling at this point is because the jobs were changing. Women were getting into the workforce. They were getting into professions that had previously been dominated by men. Now, more women are in law school. More women are in med school. And so we saw this coming in the late 90s. And I wish Dick was around because he would probably be the first to say, "We told you so."
My grandmother, a long time ago, used to talk about women are either nurses, secretaries, or teachers. But now, if they're good at science, they go into science. I don't know if that's impacting. That's part of what you saw coming up.
Well, we saw the economy changing, and we also saw the skills that were going to be needed in the workforce these days. I know this is going to sound controversial, but lend themselves to a lot of qualities that women are known for. The interaction, empathy, communication. No offense, gentlemen, but this is what we talked about in the book Workforce 2020. And here we are again. I guess we say in the book 2040, and this time we mean it. I mean, what are we going to say?
Larry, you're seeing this on the ground. What brings you to this project?
Yeah, so obviously our organization focuses on men, specifically fathers. And again, the group who we typically work with, although it's going to change, and I can talk about that later, really struggle in terms of finding jobs and so on. Now, a lot of it has to do with their background. Roughly half the men we serve are formerly incarcerated, and so that adds a layer of complexity to the issue. But typically, lower educational achievement may or may not have graduated from high school, and so we actually work with Warren Township if they want their GED, and we had 19 men last year earn their GED.
That's awesome. So you work primarily in Indianapolis, right?
In Indianapolis, although we accept men from anywhere in the state of Indiana. About 6 months ago, we had two gentlemen. Every time I say this, I can't believe this, but they would drive down every day from South Bend to attend the class.
But this is not just an urban issue.
Oh,
right?
no.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Fathers are struggling across all demographics: age, race, class, married, divorce. Dads are really, and not just, certainly the job issue is important, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually, dads are, and that's not to say that moms aren't, but we focus on dads.
I see some franchise opportunities for you here, Larry. I mean, what are you thinking? I mean, you could.
I want to move. Yes. So unfortunately, we were awarded an $8 million FSSA grant, federal dollars, in the waning days of the previous governor's administration, and then the new governor came in and took it away. And that was going to allow us to expand outside of Marion County for the first time. So Fort Wayne, South Bend, Richmond, and Terre Haute.
Well, let's talk about some of the data behind all of this. Carol, you and I started to look into some of the data, and we started with looking at the elementary and secondary, and they're going to keep going. And some of the data that really stand out are the later data. But it was really striking as we started there. There is this belief that the boys are behind from the beginning. And yet we looked at the iLearn data for Indiana, and I was shocked to see that except in English, where we've always known that for whatever reason girls seem to do better, boys are leading in everything. In math, we assumed that, except we thought there's been a switch in that. In social studies, and then in passing of both English and math. But what really surprised me is they also lost less during COVID and have caught up more since COVID in all of the subjects. And I just found that fascinating, and it just screams to me why we need to dive into this a little bit more, because they don't seem to start behind. And I'm curious if you have any reactions to that. But then I guess the bottom must drop out. I mean, what happens after that? I mean...
Well, I guess that's one of the things we'll be looking at with the study. But lots of things happen to adolescent girls and boys, and I think the technology kicks in then, and the isolation. I mean, Lumina just came out with a study. I don't know if you saw it last week on men, boys and men, and they talked about the decline in scouting, for instance. 62% decline for boys, about 30% for girls. But boys stop being very social during that time. They get hooked on the video games, the technology. Could be one aspect of it. I mean, we're going to dive into this. Sporting, participation in sports has declined considerably among boys and girls. So I think that might have something to do with it. But this study is going to really try to look into some of what is going on and why they're not participating in education beyond high school in big numbers anymore.
At what age does the bottom drop out, where that, ahead of girls early
I'd say
on?
middle school is probably the...
Yeah, we haven't gotten into the high school data yet, but I'm guessing that, because we know that the college going rates are lower. We know that college completion rates are lower. We know that job participation is lower. Wages are lower.
Just about every measure. More involvement in drug use among boys. More involvement with the justice system. So there's just a lot that goes on that is unhealthy and really inhibits their future growth as individuals. And so there's a lot to look into in this. And you've got a lot of insights off the ground.
Yeah.
I'd be really interested to hear what happens. All of a sudden, girls and boys are along the same path, and then they diverge in
I think there are
negative
a
ways.
couple of things going on. One, I think it's hard to overstate the importance of social media, the impact of social media, especially around the teen years. And I think that's driving a lot of pathologies. I mean, whether it's increased suicide, lack of self-esteem, for boys and girls. There's a lot of focus on self-image issues around girls when it comes to social media, but I think frankly, whether it's lifestyle issues or fear of missing out or whatever, that does also impact boys as well. And then when we look at in particular our population, so historically we've served probably 95% African American men. That is beginning to change, though. We're probably down to around 88%. We're getting a lot more Caucasian men, Hispanic men, immigrants, because again, this issue of fatherhood is really it sort of crosses all boundaries.
Derek, I want to mention a statistic I saw the other day, and it was from a book called Men Without Work. I don't know if you know that. And so the author talked about 7 million men not engaged in the workforce in the U.S. That seems like a big number. But this was so interesting to me. Married men across all demographics are almost 100% engaged. So I thought that was interesting, and I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. And even among college-educated, high school-educated dropouts, if a man was married, he's much more likely to be engaged in work, steady work, and a good-paying job.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
It's not? What do you think about that?
I think married men on average live longer. They report having a more fulfilling sex life, and on and on. So that's not surprising to me. I think the challenge is finding the right person that you're gonna partner with, and then of course there's the issue of responsibility. If you're married, you typically feel more of a responsibility, to work and so on, and provide for yourself, not live in your parents' basement, so
Right.
on. So yeah, that's not all that surprising to me.
So if the folks who are not engaged, if the guys who are not engaged are single, what are they doing for a living?
It's a good question. I think we'll try to. You probably know a lot from the on the ground. I mean, we've heard that, technology enables you to make a pretty decent living, or you could consider it by sitting at home, either gambling, sports betting, betting on video games, the gig economy. The technology allows you not to have to go to a physical place to make a living. Some people maybe are in the underground economy. I don't know. What do you find?
Well, yeah, I think it's, again, difficult to overstate the importance of the pandemic and how that really just sort of changed everything for everybody. And obviously, we're only a couple of years out of kind of the height of it. So I think over time we'll discover more. But, as I think back, I have two, relatively young children. One is a junior in college, one who just started his freshman year. I think about them spending 8 hours a day staring at a screen, talking. And that was difficult for them, and they both made it through relatively unscathed. But for a lot of kids, they did. And even if we go back, whatever it is, 20, 25 years now, we remember bowling alone, right? We saw
Right.
this trend was coming. So lower participation in sports and all that.
Putman,
Yes.
Putman wrote that book, Bowling Alone.
Yeah.
That was a
Yeah.
big deal
Absolutely.
back when that first came out,
absolutely.
and that was before a lot of the
Before
iPhones.
Yeah. Yep. Can you imagine that? Yes. So,
And the Surgeon General in 2023 talked about the crisis of isolation
Yes.
and loneliness,
Absolutely.
and primarily among men.
yeah.
The Lumina study that was out last week talked about how men use social media, and creating a sense of community is one of the things they use social media for. And instead of going out, and they're using their iPhone as a way to connect with people, and that's pretty isolating when you think about it.
I did hear a bright spot though just yesterday on NPR. They were talking about the decline in not virtual dating, but dating apps, right? They're going old school now. People are actually meeting in person, trying to find their mate. If you can imagine that, people are trying to find someone live through an app. So maybe there's some good news.
What a concept.
Well, they talk a lot about these days about girls' mental health because of social media, but ultimately it's again a switch seems to be thrown because it's the men who, what is it, 4 times the suicide rate of women, and then I don't know if it's related or not, but opioid use, one of the stats that I think that's come out is 71% of deaths are men, not women. So it's again, it seems to switch at some point.
Yeah, there's a weight, a heaviness that men have in terms of, am I fulfilling expectations of myself, my peers, my parents, of society, and it's hard. And if you don't have, and again, fewer people are going to church and so on. So the sort of the decline in religious participation, I think, is a factor as well.
Well, the other thing that came out of the study was men don't really feel like they've got somebody to talk to. Girls probably feel like they can talk to their best friend or maybe even more their parents, but men feel like they don't have anybody to talk to about these issues, or they're not going to confide in their best buddy if they feel some of these.
And that's why I think our program is important, because the unemployment rate of our men is pretty high before they come through the program, but finding that community is crucial. And then the other thing, when it comes to not having anyone to talk to, we actually focus a lot on what we call going from maleness to manhood, and part of that means the importance of emoting, right? So a lot of these, low-income dads grew up in some pretty tough circumstances, and I can't cry, I can't show any weakness, and we help them understand that it's not weakness to show emotion, to show that you're hurting about something, you're struggling with something. And now when you're in a community of men who you perceive to be a lot like you, that is a safe space for them. So I think the suicide rate is so high in part because there's not that outlet. Men don't perceive that they have the same kind of ability to have that outlet.
That's a good point.
Carl, you were at Ivy Tech, and that seems to be a good place where we want to see our men going, or traditionally maybe. You've talked about your secret shopper experience there.
I'd like to think things are different, but I keep going back to this Lumina study because it came out last week, but one reason that these young men said they don't go to college or any kind of form of post-secondary education is, I don't want to. It's not the money, it's just, I don't want to. And I can relate to that, having been a chancellor at Ivy Tech when I was chancellor. And this was a long time ago, so I am not saying this is the case today. So if anyone from Ivy Tech is listening, I acknowledge this was a long time ago. But the first thing I did was get a secret shopper. And I got a young man who was in his 30s, but the day he came to Ivy Tech, he had the jeans, the T-shirt, the cap on, and he looked like he was probably in his 20s. And I said, act like you're just off the street, you've decided to enroll in college, you're tired of these low-income jobs, and just tell me about what happens to you from the time you walk in. And it was really a very horrific experience for this young man, because he walks in, the first thing that Ivy Tech did was give him a math test. And he did not come prepared that day to take a math test because they wanted to see, his level so that they could properly place him. But that's not the first thing you do when somebody walks in and said, tell me how I can enroll in college. And then the whole day got confusing from there. Go down to the bursar's office and fill out the FAFSA. And he said, I don't know what a bursar is. What's a FAFSA?
Yeah.
And then they showed him the curriculum. Okay, your first year, you're going to take speech 101. And by that time, he's like, I'm out. I don't care what happens to me. I'm not taking speech.
Right.
And maybe I did pass the algebra test. I mean, it was just a horrific experience. And so I'm not sure it's changed much. Because I saw a study just last week that talked about the admissions process in community colleges and how unfriendly it is. So, okay, Ivy Tech, things could have really changed there. But I'm not sure that nationally a lot of community colleges have changed. Women will put themselves through a lot. Men are like, I don't know, am I over-exaggerating?
Well, I think I think it depends on the
Men's patience are...
Patience is probably less, but so I'm on the foundation board of Ivy Tech, so not the board.
Don't be mad at me.
No,
Tell them.
not at all.
Don't tell them.
It'll be our secret.
Okay.
But in Marion County, in Indianapolis, for example, our enrollment rates are lower. We're not at capacity in Indianapolis, whereas in some of the rural areas and some of the other areas we are.
Okay.
And I'm not quite sure why that is. I'm sure that our new chancellor will look into that. But it's very, in fact, Ivy Tech is closing its Lawrence campus and moving those operations
I've heard.
to the downtown Indy. Near downtown Indy campus, and so it's really surprising to me, especially if we look at available jobs. Obviously, Ivy Tech is really gearing people towards certain careers, and so I mean there's a wide breadth, but we need a lot of sort of traditional jobs. I mean, AI is never going to replace your plumber, for example, right? So, but for some reason our participation rates are lower in Indy than some of the other areas.
It's interesting.
You've commented to me, you think that some of the things that are happening at the federal level are maybe designed to address this issue.
I'm hopeful.
Okay.
I can always be hopeful.
Anything in particular?
Well, I'm encouraged by a couple of things. One is this administration does seem to be wanting to put more into the apprenticeship type models, which I think will be very
And this is both the
helpful.
federal and the state level.
And the state level, and I'm told Indiana has a robust program. I don't know enough about it. Maybe you do.
I do know.
The other thing is, I think this administration wants to shake up higher education and how it operates. When men say, I don't want to, they must have a vision of what post-secondary is, whether it's a community college or a university. And I don't know that they're entirely wrong about that image. So, I mean, we've got to make higher education a lot more friendlier to people. I mean, why is it that if you walk off the street and go to Ivy Tech and say, I'd like to sign up for a class, you can't do it that day. Here's your class.
With
You
online
start
and
tomorrow.
so-
Not well, the semester doesn't start until January. I mean, that's just not a friendly model. So I think this administration really wants to shake up higher education in that way. And then really, we've got to show people the return on investment of their time. Not just money,
Right.
but of their time.
Right.
And when only half the people who go to a college end up graduating, that's just not a good ROI message.
Yeah, and I think the framing is important too. I mean, even use, and there's nothing wrong with this. I use this phrase as well, but higher education as opposed to post-secondary credential.
Right.
I mean, so we focus on a post-secondary credential as opposed. So even the phrase higher education.
I know. It's like,
it makes some people.
it's not for
nervous.
me.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those. I don't want to be one of those. So yes, the language matters, but making it easy.
Yes, absolutely.
And
When we switched to post-secondary education, I wonder how many people hear that term and like, what is that?
What is
post-secondary?
that?
Yeah,
I
fair
know.
enough. Yeah.
And then you talk about high school as secondary, and people are like, wait, what?
yeah, it's
So the name of this project, Boys and Men Project for Sagamore Institute, comes from a book by a guy named Richard Reeves, and he's actually involved with the project, right?
Yes.
Actually doing some work as well over at Wabash College. Carol, you've talked to him. You want to give a little background on on that?
Well, again, and this has been a long time problem, but Richard Reeves wrote a book in 2022 called Of Boys and Men, and it didn't get a lot of play then, but it's starting to get a lot of more interest now. Some of it's political, to be quite honest. I think the Democrat Party was a little shaken up by the results of the election when they noticed that a lot of men abandoned the party and their candidates. So they're trying to understand what's going on with men these days. But Richard's work is getting some traction, and there are several states that are doing these studies about what is the condition of boys and men. And so he's involved in our project. He's coming to Indianapolis on March 19th, and he would like some data about Indiana before his speech at the Indiana Economic Club. And so this project is to study the condition of boys and men in Indiana and try to talk about what policies might facilitate their economic well-being, their education well-being, and their physical well-being. And so the report will be the first step, but we're hoping then that's a call to action if our condition mirrors what goes on across the country. So we're so delighted that you're involved in that project,
absolutely.
because we need people who are on the ground and are seeing this situation every single day from real people.
Absolutely.
Some of Reeves' ideas, whether they've been interpreted correctly or not, and that's a debate, have been a little controversial. One of the suggestions has been that he's calling for a genderless workforce. And it doesn't really say that, but he has talked about the changing roles, as we were talking about earlier. Is it HEAL? Is that what is his?
Yes.
Health, education,
Administration,
and
literacy.
as opposed to maybe all the focus being on STEM, which we all know: science, technology, engineering, math. Is that a plus or a minus? I wonder. On the one hand, people have said we've maybe, this is a horrible word, perhaps, demasculized, and is that a good thing or a bad thing from men's perspectives?
I'm going to let Larry answer. Because I don't want to get in trouble.
No.
Powers that be.
Well, I think I don't know if genderless is the way to go, if that's a valid criticism. I do think, though, that the importance of teaching skills in terms of coping and communication. I often like to say that EQ is more important than IQ, right, to be successful, right? And you have some very, very intelligent people who do fine. A lot of them, not as much, sort of, especially outside of academia. So, for us, it really is teaching how to communicate, meeting expectations. I mean, so for example, our program starts at 9 o'clock. It's 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Monday through Friday, not 9:01, right? And so because we're preparing them for the workforce, right? So there are those kinds of that sort of rules-based behavior patterns. But then, how do I deal with my emotions? Maybe I'm battling substance abuse or whatever. So we are. So I mentioned that about half the men we serve are formerly incarcerated. Our recidivism rate, our 3-year average, is 6.7%.
Wow,
right?
that is
Right.
amazing when you consider what the overall,
Right.
it has to be around 90%.
Well, in Marion County, for example, it's 45%.
The recidivism?
Recidivism, right? 45%.
It's
right?
lower than the national average.
Yeah, we're lower here, but we're single digits, and that's because I would argue, it's because we address the whole person. So I like to say that employment is necessary but not sufficient. If you look at some of our community partners, for example, at PACE, they'll tell you the same thing. Yeah, we can get them a job, right? But are we preparing them for society, for the workforce?
success?
For success,
Yes.
absolutely.
That makes sense.
Some of the other solutions that have come out of his work are maybe a little less controversial, or maybe not. Things like males ought to start school a year later, or suggestion that need to be more male teachers in the classroom. Of course, better vocational education. We've talked about that. Any ideas that stand out as something you're really looking forward to diving into? I know this project is just starting, but
well, I want to see the data first. It would be interesting to me to see kind of actually what is going on in Indiana specifically. I don't know about starting. Just as I am generally skeptical of kind of reductionist answers, right? I mean, so to say we need to just start as a blanket statement, boys later, a year later,
Right.
why,
That makes, yeah.
why would you do that?
I mean, the technology today allows so much more individualized and personalized approaches to education, yet we're not doing it. And to have that blanket statement, boys need to start later, it's very individual. And we've got the technology to do it, but schools still are one size fits all. By and large, yes, there have been some changes with charter schools and technology, but the old saying is if you went to sleep 100 years ago and woke up and walked into society today, there are two things you would recognize: school and church.
True.
And there's no reason for that. We have the technology to really revolutionize education so that it is personalized, whether you're a male or a female. And we haven't done it. The system just is impervious to change.
I really thought COVID would change that, where all these schools who had been really anti distance learning, many were trying to use it, but a lot of others were against it. Everyone was using it, and I think almost every school in the state and probably nearly the entire country has some sort of distance, some sort of online learning at this point, but it seems not to have changed too much. So just to kind of start wrapping up, what's next with this project? What's the time frame, and what do you
Well,
see?
we hope to have our report done by the end of February so that when Richard Reeves comes to Indiana on March 19th, he understands the situation in Indiana and can talk to that at his speech.
We'll be diving into some data and
Collection, and maybe we'll even have some focus groups, and we're looking forward to having you help us talk to real people about what's going on in their lives. And then we'll start talking about what are some policies and practices in Indiana that might address some of the issues we find. Indiana is going to be different than a lot of other places because we have the urban situation, but we also have a lot of rural communities. So what might work in Indianapolis may or may not work in Sullivan County, Jay County. So I think because we are a very diverse state in terms of our geography, I think will be an interesting case study for the national project as well.
so hopefully through our social media, Sagamore social media, and through some other outlets, we'll get some of that data out between now and then, and hopefully going
I'm hoping
forward
so.
as well.
Looking
And
forward to digging into that.
hopefully starting some dialogue on potential solutions. That's what Sagamore tries to focus on, is solutions. And then for this project, culminating on March 19th with Economic Club launch.
Sagamore has formed a diverse advisory group to help us think about these issues, and Larry's on that group. So that'll be important with educators and policymakers and colleges and the health aspect, because the health aspect is not unimportant. And I'm sure you see this too.
Oh, yeah.
Even healthy habits.
Right.
And you can't underestimate the importance of things like nutrition, physical activity. And I think that'll all be part of the discussion.
Just yesterday, we had IU Health out at our shop. They were doing health screenings and talking also about emotional health and all that. So they're a major partner of ours.
Well, maybe that's something we ought to look at, adding them maybe to our advisory committee. So.
Any final thoughts?
Just happy to be here. Glad to have been asked, and I'm a data person, so I can't wait to see what happens.
Well, thank you both for
And please send
your
your
time.
comments to Derek Redelman.
I will gladly pass it along
I'll give
to
you
Carol
his-
to meet So thank you both for taking on this project and for being here today.
Good to be here.
Thank you, Derek. Larry.
Thank you, Carol, Derek, and Larry. Sagamore Institute is an Indianapolis-based think tank focused on economic and educational opportunity, national defense, and civic health. To learn more about the issues discussed today, please visit sagamoreinstitute.org. Thank you for listening.